let's talk about charcoal for a hot minute, shall we? Charcoal by itself is really just burned wood. Like, that's all it is. And vine charcoal, which is what you have in your supply packets, is exactly that. It's just a stick that has been burned and charred beyond all recognition. It's very lightweight and easy to break and shatter, so please be careful when transporting these. Now, some of it does come off on your fingers, so be careful doing this on your mother's best couch, but luckily for us, it also comes off on the paper even better. So as you can see, it's a very blendable, it's very impermanent, but it does a lot of damage with very little pressure. So, if I'm grinding this into the paper and then I kind of let up on my pressure as I go across the page, you can see all of the different values I can get. And see that little value scale. And if I blow on it, you can see what happens there. Charcoal leaves behind a little thin coating of dust, which you need to be careful with, which is luckily why you have something called a kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are great for charcoal. I mean, they're also great for graphite, but really charcoal is what they're made for. And this is the little gray plastic wrapped square in your supply packet. Kneaded erasers are kneadable. Shocking to hear that, but they're really good at picking up stuff that's on paper and not damaging it. They are also self-cleaning. That's why you need them. So if you just press it against the page, look at how much it lifts up. You can kind of rub at it a little bit, but this is very non-destructive to the paper, provided that the charcoal that you've put on there hasn't been ground into the tooth of the paper or anything. You can even shape it, kind of like putty, and you can make a fine point if you want some detailed erasing or anything like that. Or you can flatten it and drag it right across. Now see where I ground that charcoal in, it doesn't pick that up because I did too much damage to the paper there. Charcoal is relatively permanent if you have pressed very, very hard. But if you haven't, then you have a lot of leeway for mistakes. If your kneaded eraser gets sort of messy and coated in charcoal, just knead it a bunch, pull it, stretch it like elastic, and then put it back together. It might not pull very cleanly at first. You might need to warm it up with your fingers, so beware of that. Now with this fine charcoal, I'm just going to grind that into the page. Now remember, see all that dust? That moves. And I usually don't approve of smudging because of this. You end up with fingerprints all over this. Charcoal is very easy to make ugly on a page because it's so movable. It's really just resting on top of that paper for the most part. So watch out for your fingerprints, because when you turn things into me, I will be looking for a lack of fingerprints. Grubby, muddy pieces are not good, so don't do that. But if we grind it into the page, again, we're getting that dust on both sides because it's disintegrating that vine charcoal. But then as I lessen my pressure, as I move to the right, and I can kind of fade it off naturally. It's pretty smooth. And then I can smear it with my finger. And again, I usually don't approve of finger smearing, especially in graphite, but here it's kind of acceptable. Charcoal is really built for smearing. So we're going to move into your assignment for the weekend, which should be done in your newsprint pad, but I'm calling it a sketchbook assignment because, I mean, that's kind of what it is. But this is the first good example that I'm going to show you. So when you draw a sphere, because that is what you have to do for this assignment, you are drawing a sphere, a round thingy. What you don't want to do is do a complete outline. Instead, you want to do like the bottom and some of the sides, but not the top at all, because nothing in the world actually has an outline. The only reason you can see the outline of something is because either the thing itself or the thing behind it is lighter or darker, and you can see that difference. It offsets it from its background. Same thing with the sphere. You should have 3 things when you shade this. You should have a shadow, you should have a midtone, and you should have a highlight. And the highlight is really just going to be the page. So I'm going to use my vine charcoal and emphasize that shadow right down at the bottom, because if my light source is coming from the upper left corner there, the light's really not going to reach the bottom of that sphere. Now notice there where I ground those 2 samples of vine charcoal in, not all vine charcoal is created equal. Some vine charcoal has a bit more of a brown tinge to it because, again, it's a stick. That's really all it is. And some is straight black. So be careful switching between pieces of vine charcoal. If you start a project with one, end it with that same piece of vine charcoal. Okay, so I kind of throw down a little bit of flat shading for the drop shadow there, but then I start smudging a bit to round out some of my shading. Now, when you shade with charcoal and you use your finger to kind of blend it together, you lose a lot of your value definition. Some of your really sharp black areas turn gray. So always pay attention to where those end up getting removed because you'll have to replace them. You should have very sharp blacks, you should have some mid-tone grays, and you should have your highlight or the color of the paper left behind. There are parts of the sphere that you really will not draw at all, and that's okay. So as you can see, that sphere is kind of coming to fruition. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser a bit to take off some near the top because, again, that outline up there at the top left part of the sphere is going to be implied. That's what it's called, an implied edge. Your brain fills in the rest of that shape. It knows where it should connect and what it's supposed to be. Don't do more work than you have to. The drop shadow down below, we'll get into that a bit more in a second, but what you really, really need to focus on when doing your sketchbook assignment is getting that shadow, that mid-tone, and that highlight. So let's look at a bad example, and we're already off to a really bad start here because I have drawn a very harsh outline that isn't even entirely round in the center of the page. Problem with that? Again, nothing in the world has an actual outline. And then I do the unforgivable sin of just shading straight across. Guess what? This is a curved object. Your shading should be curved or cross contour, kind of like we discussed. And again, messy fingerprints, gross. Be careful what you do. And we've officially blended it so much that we don't really have any super dark areas where we should. So got a harsh outline, straight shading, smudges, fingerprints, all nasty. That is a yikes. You don't want that to be you. So now for the second bad example, I'm going to start the way I should by drawing that bottom part. So we're off to a good start, and my shading is relatively curved. That's awesome, but oh, I made a mistake. This is kind of that line quality that we talked about. I mentioned in a few of my videos that the line quality where the line thickness rejoins the edge of the line, it has to come in at a very, very, very low angle. This one doesn't do that. It just like almost looks like a crescent moon and it just kind of stops. We have a mid-tone and a very sharp break into our highlight, which not good. Again, hard to blend that out, can't really do it. Also, this is way too small. The drop shadow is also just unforgivably bad. Like it's boring, it's flat, it doesn't even touch the bottom of the shape, and it only comes up behind the shape on that right side. So we don't have any harsh shadows, and it just breaks into a highlight. We have a subpar drop shadow, and this one is very, very small for the page itself. I don't want to see any tiny little spheres, so bigger yikes. So this next one is the good example, and this is what I'm really looking for with your sketch. If you watch any part of this video when doing your weekend assignment, watch this part because this is what I'm looking for. I start off doing that spherish shape down in the lower right, and you can have your light source coming from any direction, like right or left, but I just prefer a left light source for some reason. But I start by kind of doing that really, really, really thin crescent moon that curves around. Like even without all the shading, you can kind of see that implied edge and where it would loop back around to make a sphere. But as I get toward the center, I'm really going to lighten my touch. The more lightly charcoal is placed on the page, the easier it is to blend away. I'm going to redefine that bottom edge, really get it dark. Because again, I'm going to smudge it with my finger and I'm going to lose a lot of that value. I'm going to touch up some of my edges with my kneaded eraser, smudge it in. Again, those dark blacks are already kind of turning medium gray. Now, whenever you want a harsh value, notice how I'm holding my vine charcoal. I hold it like a legitimate pen or pencil, pretty close to the tip. The more pressure you want, the closer to the tip you should hold it. But as I get toward the center, look at how far away I'm holding that piece of Vine charcoal. And touch up that highlight with my kneaded eraser a bit, and then smudge some more, very carefully. And notice how far down the Vine charcoal I'm holding that. The lighter the tone, the further back you should hold it. The base of the Vine charcoal sitting almost in that juncture between my forefinger and thumb. Please do this. This is imperative, and this will be really helpful when we get to graphite shading too. The further back you hold your pencil, the lighter the value will be, because you just can't exert that much force in terms of like leverage and stuff. You can't do it. It's very difficult to get that dark value when you're holding it like that. So it can cause restraint. I'm gonna fill in my drop shadow a little bit now. My shading is straight across. It's sitting on a flat surface. Unless the thing that your sphere is sitting on is curved or angled or something, your drop shadow shading should always be straight across. Like literally no exceptions. So like that's just how it is. I don't make the rules here. I mean, I do, but not in this. Okay, if your tabletop is flat or imaginary tabletop is flat, then your shading should be flat as well. Don't curve your lines, don't angle them, and make sure that that drop shadow comes up behind the shape a little bit on both sides as well. If you just have your drop shadow sitting beneath your shape, it'll look like it's floating in midair, which we don't want. I'm going to supplement some of my cross contour shading with straight shading, which can work because I'm basically doing cross hatching with my charcoal, which can blend together these strokes pretty well. But again, very light touch, holding my charcoal way back. Touch up some of my highlight. And then blend in my drop shadow just a bit. Again, I lost a lot of my dark value right at the bottom there. But this is a good example of what we need because we don't really have a harsh outline. We have a flat, even drop shadow. It is appropriately sized for the page, like the whole thing, and the shading fits the contour of the sphere and isn't just straight across and boring. And this is the last bad example, I promise. And when I was talking about that flat drop shadow, this is what I don't want to see. This is called windshield wiper syndrome, and I hate seeing it. It's very easy to let your wrist do the work, but your wrist will operate on a curve. This one has sloppy shading. There's only a midtone and a highlight. It's windshield wiper syndrome. Fingerprints, there's a harsh outline. I can't even begin to describe how incorrect this is, so please don't turn this into me. This is what we're looking for. And again, notice that the density of the shadow at the bottom of the sphere is pretty harsh, and I'm going to go back in and darken that even more. If you don't have any clear spots of black on your page, right where the bottom of that sphere meets the tabletop, you have done something wrong. Again, highlight, midtone, shadow. Don't forget all three. Now, the last thing that you need to do with the sketchbook assignment is really quick. You need to draw me a value scale, and this might assist you, especially if you do it before you do the sphere. So you might want to try it out a few times and just take up a few spots in your newsprint pad. But you should start at very, very, very dark black and fade all the way to the paper color on one side or the other. But I want a clear value scale so I know that you know what super dark black is, what grays and midtones are, and then what your highlight is, or just your page color. You need to be able to show restraint in your shading. And that's it for this weekend. Good luck!